Lesson 1. Slavery and Western Expansion. It matters because the spread of slavery into new territory became the overriding political issue of the 1850s. Admitting new slave states or new free states would upset the balance of power in the national government. The search for compromise. Guiding question. Did the North or the South achieve more of its goals in the Compromise of 1850? Why? The war with Mexico greatly increased tension between the North and the South. It had opened new lands to American settlers, and had again raised the issue of whether slavery should be allowed in the new areas. The Wilmot Proviso. In August 1846, Representative David Wilmot, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, proposed an addition to a war appropriations bill known as the Wilmot Proviso. The bill stated, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall ever exist in any territory gained from Mexico." Wilmot's proposal outraged Southerners. They believed that any anti-slavery decision about the territories would threaten slavery everywhere. Over fierce Southern opposition, a coalition of Northern Democrats and Whigs passed the Wilmot Proviso in the House of Representatives. The Senate, however, refused to vote on it at first. South Carolina Senator John C. Calhoun prepared a series of resolutions to counter the Wilmot Proviso. He argued that because the states collectively owned the territories, Congress had no right to ban slavery there. Calhoun warned that political revolution, anarchy, and civil war would surely erupt if the North failed to heed Southern concerns. The Calhoun resolutions never came to a vote, but they showed the growing anger of many Southerners. Popular sovereignty. The issue of slavery's expansion divided the nation along sectional lines. Many moderates began searching for a way to spare Congress from having to wrestle with the issue of slavery in the territories. Michigan Senator Lewis Cass proposed that the citizens of each new territory should decide whether to permit slavery, an idea that came to be called popular sovereignty. This idea appealed to many in Congress. Many Northerners supported the idea, believing Northerners would settle most of the new territory and then ban slavery there. The Free Soil Party emerges. As the 1848 election approached, the Whigs chose a war hero, Zachary Taylor, to run for president. The Whigs in the North were divided, however. One group of Northern Whigs, known as Conscience Whigs, opposed slavery. They objected to Taylor because they believed he wanted to expand slavery westward. The decision to nominate Taylor led many Conscience Whigs to quit the party. They joined with anti-slavery Democrats from New York, who were frustrated that their party had nominated Lewis Cass instead of Martin Van Buren. These two groups then joined members of the abolitionist Liberty Party to form the Free Soil Party, which opposed slavery in the free soil of Western territories. The Free Soil Party's slogan summed up their views: free soil, free speech, free labor, and free men. As a result, candidates from three parties campaigned for the presidency in 1848. Democrat Lewis Cass supported popular sovereignty. Although this support was not mentioned in the South, his promise to veto the Wilmot Proviso should Congress pass it, however, was often reported. Former President Martin Van Buren ran for the Free Soil Party. General Zachary Taylor, a Whig, avoided the whole issue of slavery in the territories. On Election Day, the Free Soilers split the Democratic vote in New York. As a result, Taylor won the state and enough electoral votes to win the election. The 49ers head to California. In 1848, gold was discovered in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada in California. By the end of 1849, more than 80,000 49ers had arrived to look for gold. The rise in California's population enabled it to apply for statehood. Congress had to decide whether it would be a free state or slave state. Although President Taylor was a slaveholder, he did not think slavery's survival depended on its expansion westward. He believed that the way to avoid a fight in Congress was to have Californians make their own decision about slavery. With Taylor's encouragement, California applied for admission as a free state in late 1849. The Great Debate begins. If California became a free state, the slaveholding states would be in the minority in the Senate. Southerners feared that this might result in limits on slavery and states' rights. A few Southern leaders began to talk openly of secession, of taking their states out of the Union. Analyzing primary sources. Webster on secession. I wish to speak today not as a Massachusetts man, nor as a Northern man, but as an American. I speak today for the preservation of the Union. Hear me, for my cause. There can be no such thing as a peaceable secession. Peaceable secession is an utter impossibility. I see as plainly as I see the sun in heaven what that disruption itself must produce. I see that it must produce war, and such a war as I will not describe. Daniel Webster, from Appendix to the Congressional Globe, May 7, 1850. Clay's proposal. In early 1850, Senator Henry Clay of Kentucky tried to find a compromise that would enable California to join the Union. He proposed 8 resolutions, listed in pairs, offering concessions to both sides. The first pair allowed California to enter as a free state, but the rest of the territory obtained from Mexico would have no restrictions on slavery. The second pair settled the boundary between New Mexico and Texas in favor of New Mexico. Texas would be compensated by having the federal government take on its debts. This would be good for the many Southerners who held Texas bonds. Clay's third pair of resolutions outlawed the slave trade in the District of Columbia, but slavery itself would still be legal. The final pair of resolutions prohibited Congress from interfering with the interstate slave trade and called on Congress to pass a stronger Fugitive Slave Act. These concessions were intended to reassure the South that after California joined the Union, the North would not use its control of the Senate to abolish slavery. Clay's proposals triggered a massive debate and would need the approval of Senator John C. Calhoun, a defender of the South's rights. Calhoun's response. Calhoun believed that Northern agitation against slavery threatened to destroy the South. He demanded its equal rights in the territories, the return of fugitive slaves, and a guarantee of a balance of power between the sections. Otherwise, secession was the only honorable solution. The Compromise of 1850. At first, Congress did not pass Clay's bill, in part because President Taylor opposed it. Then, Taylor died unexpectedly and was succeeded by Vice President Millard Fillmore, who supported the compromise. 37-year-old Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois took charge to resolve the crisis. He divided the large compromise initiative into several smaller bills. In this format, senators could abstain or vote against whatever parts they disliked while supporting the rest. By fall, Congress had passed all the parts of the original proposal. President Fillmore also had signed them into law. Progress check. Summarizing. How did the California Gold Rush affect the issue of slavery? The Fugitive Slave Act. Guiding question. Under what circumstances, if any, do you believe citizens should disobey a law? Henry Clay had conceived of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 to benefit slaveholders. It actually hurt the Southern cause, however, by creating hostility toward slavery among Northerners who had been indifferent. Northern resistance. Under the Fugitive Slave Act, any African American could be accused of being a runaway and captured. The accused then would be brought before a federal commissioner. Unable to testify, the accused had no way to prove his or her case. A sworn statement asserting that the captive had escaped or testimony from white witnesses was all a court needed to order the person sent south. Furthermore, commissioners had an incentive to rule in favor of the slaveholder. They received a $10 fee if they sided with the slaveholder, but only $5 if the decision went the other way. A person who refused to assist slave catchers capture fugitives could be jailed. Newspaper accounts of the unjust seizure of African Americans fueled the fire. Many Northerners were angered by such seizures, and by the requirement that ordinary citizens help capture runaways. This provision drove many into action. Frederick Douglass emphasized this part of the law in his speeches. He asked the audience if they would turn a runaway over to the pursuing bloodhounds. "No," the crowd roared. The Underground Railroad. Although the Fugitive Slave Act included heavy penalties for helping a runaway, whites and free African Americans continued their work with the Underground Railroad. This informal system helped thousands of people escape slavery. Members, called conductors, transported runaways in secret and saw them to freedom in the northern states or in Canada. The most famous conductor was Harriet Tubman, herself a runaway. She risked many trips to the South, even after slaveholders offered a large reward for her capture. A Quaker abolitionist, Levi Coffin, became the most famous station master. It is estimated that he and his wife Catherine sheltered and protected some 3,300 African Americans during their escape to freedom. Uncle Tom's Cabin. Harriet Beecher Stowe had seen slavery firsthand when she lived in Cincinnati, Ohio. A letter from her sister Isabella describing slave catchers dragging off African Americans led her to write Uncle Tom's Cabin. "Now, Hattie," Isabella wrote, "if I could use a pen as you can, I would write something that would make this whole nation feel what an accursed thing slavery is." After running as a newspaper serial, Uncle Tom's Cabin came out as a book in 1852. The book changed Northern perceptions of African Americans and slavery. Theatrical dramatizations of the novel reached an even wider audience than the novel, which eventually sold millions of copies. Southerners tried unsuccessfully to have the novel banned. They attacked its portrayal of slavery, accusing Stowe of writing distortions and falsehoods. The book's dramatic impact on public opinion added to the sectional tensions leading up to the Civil War. The Kansas-Nebraska Act. Guiding question: why did Kansas become a battleground between pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups? The opening of Oregon to settlement and the admission of California to the Union convinced Americans that a transcontinental railroad should be built to connect the West Coast to the rest of the country. The railroad would promote settlement and growth in the territories along the route. Debating the route of the Transcontinental Railroad. The choice of the railroad's eastern starting point became a new issue in the sectional conflict. Two proposed routes were a northern route from Chicago and a southern route from New Orleans. The southern route ran through a small section of northern Mexico. Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, a supporter of the South's interests, convinced President Franklin Pierce to buy this land. Pierce sent James Gadsden to Mexico to pay $10 million for a 30,000 square mile strip of land that became known as the Gadsden Purchase. Senator Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois supported the northern route. He knew that the route required Congress to organize the unsettled lands west of Missouri and Iowa. He proposed a bill to name the lands the Territory of Nebraska. Southern senators said that if he wanted Nebraska organized, the Missouri Compromise must be repealed. Repealing the Missouri Compromise. Douglas wanted to open the northern Great Plains to settlement. He devised a bill that proposed to undo the Missouri Compromise and allow slavery in the region. He also proposed dividing the region into two territories, Nebraska in the north, adjacent to the free state of Iowa, and Kansas in the south, west of the slave state of Missouri. This looked like Nebraska was intended to be free territory, while Kansas was intended for slavery. Douglas's bill outraged Northern Democrats, Whigs, Free Soilers, and anti-slavery Democrats. Despite this opposition, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed in May 1854. Bleeding Kansas. Kansas became the first battleground between those favoring the extension of slavery and those opposing it. Since eastern Kansas offered the same climate and rich soil as the slave state of Missouri, settlers moving there from Missouri were likely to bring enslaved persons with them. Northerners hurried into the territory in hopes of creating an anti-slavery majority. They could count on the support of the New England Emigrant Aid Company, which recruited and outfitted anti-slavery settlers bound for Kansas. With supplies and rifles, anti-slavery Northerners headed to the new territory. Pro-slavery Senator David Atchison of Missouri responded by calling on men from his state to go to Kansas. In 1855, thousands of Missourians, called border ruffians in the press, voted illegally in Kansas, helping to elect a pro-slavery legislature. Anti-slavery settlers then held a convention in Topeka and drafted their own constitution that banned slavery. By early 1856, Kansas had two territorial governments. On May 21st, 1856, border ruffians attacked the town of Lawrence, a stronghold of anti-slavery settlers. The attackers wrecked newspaper presses, plundered shops and homes, and burned a hotel and the home of the elected Free State governor. Bleeding Kansas, as newspapers dubbed the territory, became the scene of a territorial civil war between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers. By the end of 1856, about 200 people had died in the fighting, and some $2 million worth of property had been destroyed. The caning of Charles Sumner. Meanwhile, the Senate hotly debated the future of the Western Territories. On May 22, 1856, Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner, a fiery abolitionist, gave a speech accusing pro-slavery senators of forcing Kansas into the ranks of slave states. He singled out Senator Andrew P. Butler of South Carolina, saying Butler had chosen a mistress, the harlot, slavery. Several days later, Butler's second cousin, Representative Preston Brooks, approached Sumner at his desk in the Senate chamber. He shouted that Sumner's speech had been a libel on South Carolina and Mr. Butler, who is a relative of mine, and then raised his gold-handled cane and beat Sumner savagely, leaving the senator severely injured and bleeding on the floor. Many Southerners considered Brooks to be a hero. Shocked by the attack and outraged by the flood of Southern support for Brooks, Northerners strengthened their determination to resist the barbarism of slavery. One New York clergyman confided in his journal that no way is left for the North but to strike back or be slaves.